Let's open up the Vintage Collection Figrin Dan figure VC249. Villa Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there, thanks for visiting Villa Varykino. Now that amazing HasLab Mos Eisley Cantina playset is moving into production, I'm sure I'm not the only collector out there that is going through their Cantina character figures to do a bit of a stock take of which ones they have and which ones they might be missing. First place I went and checked was my collection of Vintage Collection carded figures to see if there were others that I might want to get out of their packaging. And as luck would have it, I only had one Cantina character still on its card. That was Figrin Dan. I think it's high time we get him out so I can add him to my loose Cantina character figures so I can do a proper thorough check of the ones that I have and which ones I am missing, because I'm sure lots of us are going to be doing the same. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, we'll get Figrin Dan out of his plastic bubble so we can check out all of the details and the accessories. But first, let's take one last look at the backing card. The Vintage Collection packaging, of course, takes strong inspiration from the original packaging of the action figures by Kenner from the 70s and 80s. Of course, A New Hope was simply known as Star Wars, so the packaging for those figures just has the Star Wars logo there, merging into the double chrome racetrack design that surrounds the character art here. For A New Hope, we also have the iconic Luke and Leia artwork here in the top right. This is a slightly older backing card by Hasbro when they were still putting the warning symbol text up here in the top right, which you can see covers Luke's lightsaber. The most recent A New Hope figures from the Vintage Collection line, Hasbro moved that warning text down below the Kenner logo, a big improvement. Bit of a shame this one still has that old logo placement there. For Figrin Dan, we have this really bright sort of leafy green accent color for the title plate where we have Figrin Dan in black text, and of course behind the character as well. It's kind of fun because it makes me think of the vintage Han Solo action figure that also used a strong green print, and of course Han Solo was in the Cantina in A New Hope as well. It's kind of surprising how clear the character print here is for Figrin Dan, considering that this is the very first Star Wars film. I can see all of the details and greeblies on his clue horn instrument there quite clearly. There are some promo character shots here that are still dark and kind of a little bit out of focus because they weren't really planning ahead for action figures made more than 40 years later to have such high def imagery from those original scenes. So I think this is absolutely fantastic. We can see his face clearly. We've got some good light and some fantastic detail there. Really nice. We can see that Figrin Dan himself comes with 3 musical instruments. A little bit interesting because you're not really ever going to use these. If you buy him multiple times to kind of build out a Cantina band, we don't really need multiples of 3 because you only need 1 instrument per character. That's what the later released Vintage Collection Army Pack was for, where they had 7 Cantina band members and all the instruments. I think when it's just Figrin Dan, we only needed the 1 instrument, but hey, a few bonus accessories I think is fun, even though they make a little less sense in this context. Overall, I really like the front of this backing card. Just wish that Hasbro had thought of moving that warning box a little bit earlier in the production line. Looking at the back, we have that iconic black backing card. This one is VC249. We've got the Star Wars logo and twin racetrack here, surrounding colorful rectangles showing some of the other figures from this particular line, like Fennec Shand, Ahsoka Tano, Figrin Dan obviously, and Din Djarin. We've got the Vintage Collection logo here, and the rest of the backing card is just the barcode, attention, copyright, all of that kind of stuff. This one was a little bit harder to find for us here in New Zealand. It disappeared off store shelves fairly quickly. As you can see, my card has just a few dings and nicks. I've got a little bit of a scrunch here and a little bit of a mark on the front. I was just very happy to find it. I will be keeping the backing card. I know it's always fun for collectors. You want your collectibles to be in the most mint condition possible, but for me, it is more fun to have this than to not, even if I have a bit of a dinged up backing card. So it's definitely time to open him up and check out all of the details. Now I have a Figrin Dan and the 3 musical instrument accessories out of the packaging so we can take a closer look, and of course I'm going to start with Figrin Dan himself. I think Bith are kind of cute, something about those round black eyes. We've got a uniquely sculpted head here. There isn't a lot of paintwork going on, but I really do like the sculpting here. Pretty much this kind of yellowy flesh tone with some orange accenting around the front of the face. We can see that he does have a little bit of a shaped mouth hole there, so we can just insert the tip of his musical instrument so that it looks like he will be playing it when we go to pose him with his instruments later. He's wearing a black shirt, kind of reminds me of Luke's tunic in Return of the Jedi. We've got this sort of a flap cutting across there. Not the most stylish thing for the leader of a band, but it is what it is from the original trilogy. I know they had some quirky choices when it came to costuming their Cantina aliens. So on the lower half of his body, he's got what appears to be sort of a grey, slightly green cargo pants, which I don't think are entirely accurate. I think they just have more grey flat trousers in the movie. On the feet here, we just have brown boots. It's kind of hard to really see their shoes very clearly in the movie, but we can see that we've got some sculpting going on here. We've got a little bit of a paint floor here. I can see that the grey of the pants has sort of come down over the top of the boots, or the brown of the boots hasn't come up high enough to cover that. A little bit of a shame there. I didn't really see that when it was carded, but as I mentioned, I was only able to grab the one, so I wasn't going to be able to choose a different one on the shelf. Hopefully I can sort of pose them so I don't really notice that too much. I'm not going to be too adventurous with the way that I eventually pose Figrin Dan. He's going to be holding his musical instrument, but let's check out the articulation here, because we do expect a good level of articulation from the Vintage Collection line. So I can turn his head side to side because of course we do want to be able to match up his mouth to whatever musical instrument we want him to hold. So having a bit of movement there with the face is going to be important. Also, we want to make sure that he can hold musical instruments in different poses. His arms pop out there to the sides very easily, and we can see the rest of his shirt's pretty plain all over. Nothing there painted, just black. We've got that mid-torso articulation, a little bit tight there to the sides. It's not really going to do much there. It's mostly sort of a little bit front and back. I can bend him back there. It holds that position nicely, doesn't sort of snap back into place. We'll put his arms down by his sides. So let's check out his elbows. Of course, he's going to have to move his elbows quite well if we're going to be able to hold on to those long horn-shaped sort of flutes and things like that. I really like the sculpting on his hands. Again, same color plastic as his head, as you would expect, with a little bit of that sort of orange peachy accent color to really highlight the sculpting here. I really like his hands, so unique with all of these sort of tiny little knuckle details. Really nice, very cool. Moving down, we've got sort of rather exposed hips here. It's not my favorite in terms of sculpting around the hips. I can see the articulation points here very clearly. I can sort of get the splits and things like that. I've got that swivel point here at the top of the thighs, which does kind of stand out a little bit here, but there isn't really costume detail that Hasbro can use to hide this, like Clone Trooper armor plates always hide this particular articulation point really well. I do like the way the pants kind of come down here over the knee. It always kind of hides it a little bit from the front. You can just make it out there. So we can bend the knee backwards here. And we've got, the articulation on the boots is kind of higher up on the ankle compared to other figures I've opened recently. It's a lot higher up at the boot there, but I can still get a reasonable amount of articulation there in the ankle. Always useful. I don't do too much articulation with the ankles, but it is so important if you're trying to get them to just stand upright. I always find that I'm always playing around with the ankles the most of all, trying to get them to stand upright. I do hope he balances well because of course we're going to be holding a fairly long instrument out to the front of his body, but you can see he does a pretty good job of it. I really like that. Apart from that small paint floor at the top of the boot. I like the rest of the figure. We've got fairly tidy paint on the rest of it here. It's not that complicated. It would be surprising if Hasbro got this part wrong, when really that's the only thing they have to get right. There isn't any other sort of details here to really go over. It's a little bit simple, but then that was his costume in the original trilogy. So let's pop him off to the side there, and let's go over the 3 musical instruments. Now, they certainly came up with some interesting names for these, and I don't know them off the top of my head, so you will forgive me because they've got some quirky names. Now, Figrin Dan himself uses this particular one, as we can see in that backing card art, and it has some fantastic detail, and this is known as the clue horn. This is the most detailed out of the 3 accessories we have for this pack, and we can see the sort of mouthpiece. We've got this sort of a rubbery dark piece, and I'm hoping that we can able to insert this little mouthpiece in his mouth so it looks like he is actually sort of blowing into it and using it there. But I really like the weathering and accenting along this silver accessory. Looks really fun. They certainly had some adventures making up space musical instruments for the original trilogy, didn't they? Overall, I think this is really nice. There's a lot of detail going on here. I know some of the older versions of Figrin Dan and the Modal Nodes just had sort of one color accessories. I do appreciate the level of detail gone into this one. So the next one is the complicated one. This is the Doranian Bishnaquel. That's such a mouthful. We've got Clue and Doranian Bishnaquel. I kind of wish they all had much more simpler names. This one is also got some really nice details and painting. We've got sort of a gold trim down at the back there. We've got some silver details, and of course we also have a small little mouthpiece there. I think this is really nice. I like the fine detail on these accessories. I'm not really going to have any use for this one because I want this particular figure to be Figrin Dan. He's going to use this one, but I guess I can give this to another one. And I do kind of envy the interesting dioramas that people can build where they just kind of mix and match characters and accessories and kind of make up imaginary sort of space bands with all sorts of fun instruments. The last and smallest of the musical instrument accessories we have here is the fanfare. This one is a plain color. We've got some fine sculpting detail on it with all of these ridges, but there is no other paint work on this. But again, we've got that same sort of fine tipped mouthpiece. So all 3 of these instruments should be able to be held and used, as we say, by Figrin Dan. They're not going to make any sounds, but I like the fact that all 3 of them will work with his unique little mouth sculpting there. So I'm going to try and get him to hold the clue horn, the one that I want him to hold. This is the thickest, and I'm hoping because of his sort of unique hand sculpt that this isn't going to be a wrestle. I'm kind of hoping that it's not going to be really awkward or sort of bending the actual instrument itself. And I'm wondering what the best way to get it into his hands are, because I really do not want to bend his fingers or bend the instrument. Okay, I think I can get him to hold it there. He's kind of got like his smaller fingers kind of extended, kind of like a pinky sort of hold there. And then I'm gonna have to turn that around because I really want to get that mouthpiece in place, but this is going to be quite a job. I'm just going to test the mouthpiece out first because of course that is going to be a crucial part of posing it. That looks quite good. It kind of just holds in there, and I can sort of almost just hold it like that. There's enough tension, and that wasn't too hard because there is a lot of flex with this piece. I was a little bit worried it was just kind of going to go everywhere, but I can get him to hold that. So let's just take a minute and figure out the posing for this figure, because of course he's going to have to hold his beloved clue horn. Thankfully, that wasn't too hard at all to get Figrin Dan to hold his clue horn. I tried to pose it like he is pictured on the backing card image, which wasn't actually too hard. And you can see that the sculpting for his mouth really does work so well with the mouthpiece of his musical instrument. It actually holds in place really well, so he actually does look like he is playing his instrument rather than just holding it in front of him. Now that I have this version of the figure, I am definitely keen to track down that Hasbro Army Builder pack for the Modal Nodes set. I know that that set does use the same sculpt for the body as this one, so it should look very nice alongside it. It won't get that sort of clashing of an old and new sculpt together, because of course I only have this one carded figure. Speaking of sort of modal nodes alongside each other, for the sake of comparison, let's take a quick look at this vintage collection one with some of the other versions that I have in my collection. Now these are going back a ways, so these are two other Bith musician action figures that I have in my collection. This one is from the Power of the Force 2 when they released the Modal Nodes, and this one is Varykino, who is a Bith from Jabba's Palace. But we can see we've got some similarities in the fact that he is a Bith musician as well. So you may recall that this one sort of came not in a standard carded figure, it came in a box with a bag of musical accessories, so you could keep buying the action figure and choose which accessory you wanted to put with it. And you can see I've got one spare because I ended up buying a bunch to try and build out my Cantina Band, so I've got all these accessories left over, and you can see what a huge step up we have. I know this one has its quirks that aren't particularly the most accurate for the Modal Nodes in terms of their costume, but when we look at some of these older figures, these ones were around 97, 98 if I recall, and you can see just the step up we have in terms of the articulation. I was never a fan of these sort of big rubber capes. They always just look a little bit odd. We've got really clunky large articulation, which of course was fairly typical for the time. I don't like those hinges there. We've got a very small little mouth sculpting piece here. Clearly this isn't going to go anywhere near his mouth. He's just kind of holding it. The hands are very sort of soft, and we don't have too much in the way. We've got a little bit of sort of an orange sort of haze accenting the front of the face. Nothing like the paintwork we have on this one to really sort of show off the features there. A little bit here. This one is the most orange of the three that I have here. Of course, Varykino is not exactly the same. He's an all black one. We can see that we got a much better musical instrument, but again, he's not really holding it in a sophisticated way. And we have absolutely no articulation here on the arms or the legs either, apart from the hips. He's looking almost a little bit retro in his articulation, just with those sort of old school hips there and arms. It's kind of fun that he looks so retro Kenner era, but again, this was in the 90s. We should have had something a little bit better. So lining these three up, I am really happy with this new one. It could be a little bit more accurate in terms of the pants, but honestly, that is not a deal breaker for me. And of course, now that I know that that HasLab Cantina playset is going to be on its way next year, I'm definitely going to be putting that Cantina army building, band building multi-pack on my shopping list to track down. Sadly, I'm going to have to try and find that one overseas. It wasn't available here locally. It's going to cost a little bit, but hey, it's going to be worth it to add the most recent up-to-date version of the Modal Nodes to that awesome Cantina playset. So this is a lot of fun. I know we've got a long time to wait before that Cantina eventually arrives, but hey, it's going to take a while to sort of go through all of the action figures and figure out which ones we really want to be adding into that set. There's nothing like getting a big play set and then having to go and find the figures. I want all my figures ready, so I'm ready to go putting them in place when that Cantina finally arrives. So really happy with this figure. I think he looks really cute. I like the finer sculpting on his musical instrument, the way that he can actually hold it so it looks like he's playing it. It's really cute. I had a lot of fun with this one. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another vintage collection action figure and had a lot of fun. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars action figure fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a TVC fan, I recently opened the 2024 reissue of the Luke Skywalker X-Wing pilot figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as our whole vintage collection playlist. This is the way.